was looking for an easy project, not with a whole lot of steps and glue ups and all that kind of stuff with it. This will have one glue up, but it's going to be pretty simple. The pattern came from Steve Goodside, and he calls it 5 home signs, and it's good to be home is one of them, and those are the other ones. It's good to be home, home sweet home, God bless our home, home is where my peeps are, and house plus love equal home. I'm going to do it's good to be home, home sweet home, and which one did I do? Home sweet home, home plus love equals home, God bless our home. The plans called for 1/4-inch thick material, but that's just a suggestion, and I had plenty of 1/2-inch poplar in stock. The board was longer and wider than I needed, so I used my radial arm saw to cut it to length and my table saw to rip it to a width that would fit the 3 house shapes and roofs. I covered the board with scroll saw tape and arranged the patterns as efficiently as possible to use the least amount of wood. I know at least 9 ways to transfer scroll saw patterns to wood. If you'd like to learn more about them, I left a link to my video on the subject on the screen and in the description. I trimmed 2 of the patterns with scissors along their bottom lines and spread each of them along one end of the board because I knew the ends were straight. I placed the 3rd pattern in the middle. Since the board is too long to cut these patterns on the scroll saw, I'll take it to my bandsaw to trim it into 3 workable size pieces. For this 1/2-inch thick poplar, I chose a number 5 Pegasus modified geometry blade. If you would like more information on selecting the correct size scroll saw blade for every project, I left a link to my video on the topic on the screen and in the description. I elected to cut the Home Sweet Home sign for this video. I'll make at least 3 of the 5 signs, but they're similar enough that I can demonstrate all you need to know about how to make these from me making one of them. I always make the inside cuts first, and I usually start at the top and work left to right as if I were reading a book. The keyhole-shaped opening for hanging the display was in the top middle of the piece, making a perfect starting place. I threaded the blade through the pilot hole, and it took only a few seconds to make the cut. I usually use a 3/32 drill bit for the pilot holes. It's large enough to thread any size scroll saw blade through it, plus it fits inside all but the small spaces on patterns. The words on this pattern are in a cursive script and are not difficult to cut. My habit when cutting letters is to stay inside the line. This pattern demonstrates why this is a good practice. The H could have been made in one piece without that break in the crossbar, but the O has to be made in 2 sections, otherwise the oval in the middle would fall out. For this reason, I'm always careful to stay inside the lines when I cut letters to ensure those necessary spaces remain intact. Another reason to stay inside the cut lines is that letters are frequently spaced close together. If you cross the lines on adjacent letters, they could run into one another. When I was first learning to use the scroll saw, I ruined an occasional project with sloppy letter cutting. I'm not recommending it, but you could get away with being a little sloppy in cutting the letters here because of the cursive font. That makes this a good beginner project. Other reasons it's a good beginner project are that the interior cuts are relatively large and there are not many of them. It would be a good project to gain some scroll saw experience. You'll notice that it only takes a few seconds to make each cut, and then I have to stop the saw, remove the blade, move to the next pilot hole, tighten the blade, and start cutting again. Projects like these demonstrate why a foot switch is an excellent accessory for your scroll saw. A second accessory I highly recommend is a lighted magnifier. Details can be tiny on some of these patterns, and the magnifier makes them easier to see and cut accurately. I don't use the light when recording video because it makes the pattern too challenging for viewers to see against the white paper. Both a foot switch and lighted magnifier are available from Bearwood Supply and the Pegasus Modified Geometry blades as well. I left a link to their website in the description. Cutting the letters M and E demonstrates the skills needed to make all the inside cuts on this project since they combine curves and angles. I drilled the pilot hole in the M where I could easily cut to the line and follow the curves to the top of the letter. Whenever I came to an angled corner, I cut right to the point where the line shifted direction, eased up pressure slightly so the blade wasn't cutting, and used the curve plus the waste space to pivot the workpiece to the next direction I needed to go. Then I put pressure on the wood and started cutting again. Following curves is generally easy, but cutting sharp corners takes skill only acquired by practicing the craft. As I mentioned, this is a good learning project because cutting the cursive script is more forgiving than other fonts. Something unusual happened while I was cutting the letter E. Part of the pattern came loose, causing it to bounce up and down with the blade. Fortunately, I was almost done cutting that letter and knew precisely where to cut the wood to complete it. I'm not sure why this happened, because the scroll saw tape is usually very reliable to hold patterns in place while cutting. At least I completed the cut for that letter with no problems. I made all these cuts in less than half an hour, so this project can quickly be done in a weekend. I don't have any more cutting tips for the letters to pass along, so let's move on to the outside or perimeter cut. When I attached the pattern to the wood, I aligned the bottom with an edge of the workpiece because I knew this edge was straight. I started cutting at the bottom left of the pattern and cut up along the vertical line until I reached the diagonal line for the roof. I eased up pressure on the blade just enough so it was no longer cutting, and then pivoted the workpiece 90 degrees using the saw kerf and waste material to maneuver the blade. It was only a short distance to the end of that line before I had to make another change of direction. This brought me to a horizontal line, and I followed that past its end and along an imaginary line off the board's edge. Now I could start cutting the diagonal line for the roof from an edge without having to make what would have been a very tight turn. Because the top of the roof was near another edge, I followed the diagonal and kept going that little extra distance to the edge. I removed the waste piece and started cutting the next diagonal line at the edge. I followed that line, made the successive 3 angled cuts in the same manner as before, and followed the line along the side of the house until it ended at the bottom. I made the roof with an easy series of cuts. I started by cutting across the bottom edge of one side of the roof, then made the easy turn to go up the inside edge. That took me to an intersection with a 90-degree corner. I made that by my standard method of cutting right to the point of the intersection, easing up pressure on the blade just enough so it was no longer cutting, and using the kerf plus the waste area to pivot the workpiece 90 degrees. Then I eased the wood back into the blade and started cutting again until I ran off the board's edge. I took the easy way out next and made the short cut across, skipping the corner. That left me an extended straight cut up the roof side, where I once again kept going past the intersection and to the edge. One final long cut on the other side completed the roof. I painted the house a light brown and the roof dark brown, so that had to be done before the glue up because it was easier. I applied a bead of glue to the back side of the roof, spread it around with my fingertip, and then placed the roof on top of the house shape. This assembly must be clamped while the glue dries, and I decided the vise on the end of the workbench was perfect for that task. It provides flat, even pressure across the entire area. Once the glue is dry, this project will be complete. This project was easy and suitable for a beginner on the scroll saw. Still, it does make a fine home decoration. As I mentioned at the beginning, 5 patterns come with this download, so you can make more than one of them. I would greatly appreciate a like and a comment if you enjoyed this video. I reply to every comment. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already done so, and if you hit the notification bell, you'll get word every time I release a new video. I know you can't wait another week, so suggestions for what to watch next are on the screen.